Oh, good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Innovation Workshop. Today we'll be doing a live working through of the project template, and I'll share that with you in a few minutes. So many leaders and organizations don't pause long enough to consider just how different operational work is from project and innovation work. And that's why I'm doing this series on innovation, to shine a light on that. It doesn't make, my interest is not in providing more of the same kind of information. It's to shine a light on the distinctions that are major. And those distinctions will have to do with neuroscience or be grounded in neuroscience. So that's my standard of how I look at this, because with the brain being, I say over 100,000 years old, but as you know, you can find places that say it's 1,000,000 years old, but 100,000 years old makes the point. With the brain being so old, it's not as though things are going to change between what we have now, what we had in the past when most of the content we have started during the New Thought era, and in the future. The brain is not going to change. Even if you look at technology over the last 30 or 40 years, it's accelerated things, but I mean, ad copy is still the same as it was before the computer age, right? And so, and many of the things, relationships, what Dale Carnegie said in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, it hasn't changed. Technology has sped it up, but we're still the same. And that's because the brain is the same. The brain hasn't really changed. We know more about what's going on because with the scanning tools that have become available in the last 3 or 4 decades, and with scientists pushing on that, and you're going to see a lot more coming out because it's in the labs, it's being worked on. It takes a while for them to get the peer reviews and enough to say from a scientific standpoint that this is so. But it doesn't mean we can't start using the information now, and that's my objective, is to lean into what neuroscience is finding and start applying that to the best practices. We don't have to create anything new. I just want to understand why the best practices work, and then from there you can make leaps. So the difference between project and operational work, it creates some challenges. The oversight can cause some damage in terms of costs, rework, brand, and impact, just due to missed requirements and more. Operational work is about accuracy, efficiency, and repeatability. It's about keeping systems running smoothly, minimizing variability, and producing consistent results. That's exactly what makes it reliable. And it's exactly why we don't want a lot of experimentation when we're doing operational work. Now, you can probably think of a manager, leader, maybe employee who's perfect for this kind of work. But project and innovation work, that's a different category. It's not about predictability. It's about solving problems that haven't been solved yet. It's about exploring the unknown, iterating in real time, and using trial and error as a legitimate strategy, sometimes the only strategy. It's best done when we can think in terms of the infinite field of possibility, where it's easy to get triggered because the unfamiliar is the source of stress. Now again, you can probably think of someone who is perfect for this kind of work. I would also surmise not only are these people not the same person, they're probably very different from each other. Here's where the breakdown happens. Most books and literature, they focus on mindset, the mindset needed for operational leadership, with the focus on efficiency and risk reduction. These best practices inadvertently get misapplied to innovation efforts that require uncertainty, patience, and flexibility. And when we do that, we choke out the very conditions that allow innovation to happen in the first place, let alone thrive. Now, let's add one more layer: how people are wired. People with an operational bias tend to favor structure, details, the past experience. They want to see proof. They ask, what's the process? What's the plan? How do we avoid failure? But people with an innovation bias tend to focus on big ideas, patterns, and future possibilities. They ask, what's possible? What haven't we tried? What if we're wrong? And that's a good thing. And here's the truth. Neither is better. They're just optimized for different parts of the business. And in business, we need both. And now we need both almost simultaneously because of how fast change is occurring. I often talk about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We're just a short step away from the next crisis, the next big thing. And every big thing was not predicted. Every big thing was not expected. It was a surprise. And that next big thing will probably be the same. The problem is most tension between departments, teams, even executives isn't about personality. It's about this fundamental mismatch in how we approach work. We expect precision in a space that requires discovery, or we expect agility in a space that demands control. If we want to lead change, whether a small pivot or a full-on transformation, we have to first acknowledge how people are wired matters, and what the work demands matters even more. That's why transformation can't end with a new strategy, a new speech, or even a successful pilot. Because once this shift is made, once that new direction is set, the hard work begins. You have to organize that work, not just around the goal, but around the way people are wired to contribute. Operational work thrives on consistency, efficiency, and precision. Project and innovation work demand ambiguity, exploration, and iteration. People focused on operations and those focused on projects bring different strengths and blind spots. But someone biased toward operations in charge of a new controversial initiative, and put somebody with the bias towards operational in charge of a new controversial initiative, and it often drifts back to the status quo. That's why establishing processes early in the steady state that reinforce change is so important. When you design with intention, matching the work to the mindset, you create momentum instead of resistance. For executives, that's the real leverage. Organizing the work in a way that unlocks people's natural strengths. Leaders who understand that can stop the friction and start building cultures where execution and innovation can coexist. And where I sit, I see that both of these need to be running parallel. You go back a few decades and it was clear that you ran a project. We have the waterfall style project, design, build, implement, test. And that project, that new implementation or new capability can last for years. But now what we're seeing is, and with Agile started addressing that early in the 2000s, Agile project management with its more iterative design. And I think the internet contributed to that because of user experience. And user experience, we found that, if you spend all this time and money building a project or a platform and then nobody's using it, why don't they use it? Because they don't like it. That led to user experience. And I say that user experience, and among other things, led to Agile, because in user experience, it was very iterative. Where you're going to put the login button, the place where people naturally look for in the screen. And you can adopt some of this as how you work. Rather than try to change behavior, rather than try to change the people that are on your team, you build your processes around their strengths and their propensities. So that's the backdrop. What we're going to do today is we're going to use Zoom and work through some real world examples so that we can, hold on a second, work through some real world examples to get out of the theory and into real world. I want to keep this practical. So what we'll do is approach it with your real input. I did include a link to the Zoom meeting, and I'll do that again here. Now, before I go on, I want to share some ideas with you that have to do with this distinction between project and operations work. First thing I want to do is, you know, when I started on this work going back 5 years to close this gap between what people know and what they actually apply, right? Because you can probably agree with me that we don't use all of what we know. And most of the best practices sound like old news to us. So it's not that we don't know it, but to know and not do is to not know. And so I started this work to look at how do we close this gap. And one of the things that showed up for me in a big way are cognitive biases. And with cognitive biases, hold on a second. Yeah, so what I was saying with cognitive biases, when I started looking at that, first of all, I knew how powerful they were because from marketing and sales, all great sales presentations, the ones that work and actually get the results, you can look at it and see that they're playing into cognitive biases. And the cognitive bias I like to use is because it's an example and most people can relate to it, is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias says that we're going to look for the things that validate what we already believe. But in practice, the way I've used it in marketing and sales, or at least to help people understand what's happening in marketing and sales, there's an interesting thing that started showing up in the 90s, I believe, that if you tell somebody something and they believe you and you continue to share information with them, if you tell them undeniably true items 4 times or 3 times, they will be biased towards believing you as a credible source for the fourth and subsequent times. And it's so bad that if you start giving them false information, it can take up to 11 iterations before they start doubting you as a source. Confirmation bias is powerful. It's why, in my opinion, conspiracy theories can take hold. It's why it's so difficult sometimes to innovate because we keep falling back to what we've known. And add on to that 95% of what we do is done by habit, and that new things create stress. And you can see the deck is stacked against us when it comes to innovation. So without that knowledge, without that information, it would be very easy to assume that, oh, they know what to do and they'll do it. But I'm telling you that when it comes to innovation, it's very difficult to be able to square that because people don't do what they know. They don't use what they know. In general, I'm speaking in general terms. Now, let's make sure that the meeting notice, that the meeting ID is available in the Zoom, in the chat. So there's the link. The link is in the chat, and the digits will get you in. The digits are 835 64859362. So I'll just put the numbers in the chat as well as a separate entry. So now continuing in the talk, the part about the cognitive biases, I subsequently went on to look at all the cognitive biases that I could find that would likely get in the way of project work, innovation, 10x, because all of this is true, right? If you go outside in any city and you look up and all those buildings, everything you see, every business, every company, every organization. I used to just sit there when I was feeling like, I've tried everything. I would go and look at the city line, the city line. I was in San Francisco, so it was pretty cool. I could sit up on this hill and I could look at the skyline and remind myself that every single one of those buildings was just an idea at one point. So when you think you've tried everything, you haven't, because you haven't accomplished what you're looking for yet. Well, I say that cognitive biases showed up as one of the major impediments towards getting those things that we want. So the other one that shows up really big is planning fallacy. And there's a book, Willpower by Kelly McGonigal. The name of the book is Willpower. Her first name is Kelly. And she talks about this study that was done where they were able to ask people what they could accomplish the following week, and then how double-blind studies are, right? And then they had them come back and look at the results, and then they would again ask them what they would accomplish the next week. And the amount of people who not only did not accomplish what they said they would then double down and say they would catch up on the following week. And this went on for 4 weeks. And even when faced with the information that said, yes, but this is what you said last week, and now you're saying you can do it again and even more, but you weren't able to do it last week. And it's always different, right? This time is always different. And you can see how that plays out. And that's that planning fallacy in action. We always overestimate what we think we can accomplish. So that was a big one. The short version, though, I guess, on the so what on the cognitive biases, rather than try to learn and understand or teach all the cognitive biases, I shifted to installing parts in the stimulus response cycle and also making distinctions between the pre-stimulus and the stimulus response. And that showed up things like this 33,000 decisions we make a day, which are really stimulus response cycles. And of that 33,000, the majority of them are at the unconscious level, which is why we have 95% of everything we do is done by habit. And because each of those stimulus response cycles are sort of priming us for the next series, we recreate the past and make it over and over and over. And then I also looked at the pre-stimulus phase as being beliefs, priming, neuroplasticity, and mindset, and physiology. And that creates a physical state of being and a mental state of being. And you could even say a spirit state of being, right? And then that state of being has a lot to do with how we handle those the stimulus that come, and whether the stimuli that come, and whether or not we're going to be triggered by it, or whether or not we're going to be able to handle it calmly. And then I made a distinction about, you have stimulus, it's not stimulus response, it's stimulus reaction response. And in that, we don't want the response to be the reaction. We want to clearly understand that there's a reaction and then there's a response. So that's just another example. And then another one, I think, is the preference for maintaining the current state, and that's the status quo. The status quo cognitive bias makes us want to maintain the status quo. So there's so much resistance around change. Most people involved in project work are very familiar with change management and why it works. And so I started looking at making some distinctions between small changes and significant changes. So we know that incremental change is, if it's small enough, it can be absorbed very easily. You can make tweaks to the operational model, send out a memo, communicate to people, and it keeps working. You have processes that support it. Sometimes you have to make a process change. But then you get a little bit bigger than that, and that memo is no longer enough. You actually need some engagement with that change management. And then, hold on a second. And then you go to the next step of transformation. One of the things that showed up when I started looking at 10X, and this goes back 5 years, I started looking at why is it possible for some people to do 10X and for other people it's impossible. Now, of course, the business model, the operating model, the environment, the offer, all those things come into play. But once you neutralize all of that and you say this company can 10X and this one cannot, what's the big difference? And the big difference is that 10X requires transformation of the owner, the leader, the team. The leadership team has to transform. Alex Chaffin talks about this with the different levels, like going from operator to owner and leader and investor. Those different levels are actually transformations of the owner. And if you don't make those transformations, it's going to be very, very difficult to navigate into the future. And that's why I created, out of all that work came the 7 performance areas: mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, relationship, professional, and financial. In those areas, I use it as a roadmap to help people navigate through the transformation. Now, what I'm going to do is look at this document here because I wanted to take a look at let me see. So hold on a second. There we go. So I wanted to take a look at this document that I put together to illustrate the differences between project work and operational work. A little bigger. And let's focus. All right, so you have operational work, you have purpose work. And so if you look at the different aspects, you have purpose: maintain stability and ongoing value, and then deliver unique change and innovation. You have nature: continuous and repetitive, and then in project, temporary and time bound. So if you think about it just from these top 2, and then I'll say consistency and reliability versus adaptation and problem solving, you can see where operational can be served by the traditional to-do list or time management. All your time management tools, they work very well with the operational world. When you get into project, there's dependencies, there's critical path, there's sub-projects that get involved, and you have to keep all these in play, and the simple to-do list is not going to be enough. The approach: follow established processes. So the processes actually help you, and they kick off habits. The process actually primes you. If you think that if you agree that we're making 33,000 decisions a day, you can understand that the processes enable that. That's a lot of priming going on where you don't have that with project work. The natural priming is not there from the process. And add to that the subconscious the network of neurons that's doing this 33,000 decisions, it processes at 11 million bits per second, whereas the conscious mind processes at only 50 bits per second. And you can see that that disparity is so big that project work by definition is just going to be a lot slower because you're changing. I should say change work by definition is going to be a lot slower. And then obviously you have to be flexible and creative. And then the project management principles, they put structure around that to make that work more easily. And then I would say agile went even further to operationalize project work. And then outcome, predictable, sustainable performance, or predictable, sustained performance, and achieve specific objectives. Stable team structure, stable and department based, huge cross functional. And I would say that if you are creating a project, you have some innovation going on, very, very important to set up a cross functional team, not just to design the project, not just to work on the project, but also to roll it out. You want them involved in the change management, you want them involved in the early design, and just like user experience, the more you can design in, if it doesn't matter, design in based on how people like to talk. Use the same words. And one of the things that's interesting is when you look at documentation that has to do with change management, a lot of times you'll see it like, we no longer do it this way, we now do it that way. We no longer do this, we now that. This has moved from here to there. But you want to think about, yes, there's probably two documents there, or two sets of communication. One is for the existing people who knew the old process and have to start using the new one. But also, there's the people who are coming in. There's going to be a lot more of them than the first category because you'll be hiring and growing, et cetera, et cetera. And so you want to have communication that's laid out in a way that makes sense, because once you start talking about we've done it this way and now we're changing to this, it gets confusing, it's adding more information, et cetera. We have leadership style, process control and optimization. I like talking about effectiveness first and then efficiency. Well, that's on the project side, vision driven and change oriented. Effective first and then it become efficient. But clarity has to be the bridge between those two. You want to make sure you have clarity as you go from effectiveness to efficiency, and then it's simplicity, right? So we want simplicity on the other side of complexity. Risk level, low to moderate, it's minimized. You have process, you have testing, there's lots of controls in place, you have contingency, you have buffers, all those are built in, and you have cross-trained people who can step in. Sometimes with project work, especially when it's first rolled out, you don't have redundancy yet because you don't have the cross-training. Higher, the risk level is obviously higher and has to be actively managed. So one of the big shifts, I think the project management, PMP folks, those in Agile, if you hire somebody with project management skills, you're going to get the lion's share of the work done. You know, if you look at the 80-20 rule, 80% of it is getting somebody with the right skills in place and then managing it from there. But what's missing is project leadership. So I make a distinction between project management versus project leadership. And it's just as you would expect. But you need somebody at the helm making the decisions, because if you look at the project triangle, and if we put quality in the middle, and then we have time, budget, and scope, somebody has to be at the helm making these decisions, because if we change the scope, one of these has to give. You either have to going to put more time in or more budget, but you can't always fix scope changes simply with more time. Some things just take what they're going to take. And the same thing with budget. You can't just throw more money at it. Sometimes the scope change has to create or requires the creation of a new project. And then you can build it up again. The project manager is not going to make these decisions because the project management is incentivized, their controls, everything has to do with managing this triangle and not letting it get out of sorts. And so they don't have the authority to just make these changes or the trade-offs or creating a phase two. They need to have that relationship with the project leader and the open lines of communication so that the project leader knows when to pull up. Operational approach just keeps pushing, pushing, pushing. Do it. Nope. Go back to the drawing board. Figure it out. Go back and figure it out. Next thing you know, you're in the last 20% of the project and you have 80% of the work to still do. And then we have time frame, ongoing and indefinite, right? And that's why it can be improved. You have you putting processes in place to improve it. And then we have defined start and end. And I would also add multiple resources are involved. And then the key challenge, avoid complacency, maintain quality, right? You keep it going every day, you widgets in, widgets out. Every day, widgets in, using the KPIs to keep the motivation going. And then you manage uncertainty and deliver value is with the project work. Now, what we're gonna do is go into the Zoom and we're going to use this document. We'll walk through the document and I'll walk through one with you in the Zoom room as we go through so we'll go through each one. And so while you guys are going into the Zoom room, I'll just start talking about this and then we'll switch over. So the project name, standard, purpose, it's self-explanatory. Then you have doing what, for whom, and why. Now this can change. If you are a solopreneur or a small organization, you're doing what is similar to the project name, but the for whom, it sometimes could be having to do with the supported vision or who's using the vision. But if you're in a larger corporation, here you would want to put the sponsor. And in a smaller organization, you could think of the sponsors being the customers who are going to pay your business the money to justify the work. And then the why, and this gets to the more of the vision, the why, the big picture. So in here, see what we're doing is we're bringing the big picture into play early on. This document is best done not with the document but on a flip chart, asking the questions, having people work through it in a cross-functional room. It works so well and it begins the change management. And the first group that needs to be influenced by the change management is the leadership team. So that leadership team is an ideal starting point for how to facilitate, for who to have in the room when you facilitate this. And I typically will have 7 or 8 in scope and only 3 out of scope. And the reason the out of scope is on there, one, it's to address scope change early on so you know right away when it should be in a phase 2 and you don't spend a lot of time. It also sets the stage that there might be a phase 2 and that doesn't become a hurdle. And a lot of times you can speed up phase 1 by adding a phase 2. So these are the obvious things. The phase 2 are the obvious ones. The you know, because clearly there's a million things we're not doing. But the ones that, like, let's say that you're going to update the CRM. Out of scope could be changing platforms. That would be something that's out of scope because it's a question that's going to come up. Again, something obvious. And the guiding principles, these become the motherhood and apple pie of this initiative. So this is where the cross-functional team gets to weigh in, and these answers are going to come from the heart because it's a guiding principle. It's what's guiding us. And so they're free to talk about it. And what it does is it gets people enrolled and helps them feel like they're being heard. I talk about self-determination theory, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. This gives you a chance to hit all 3 of those. The other thing that the guiding principles and these two sections, another thing that they do is they give you the ability to delegate responsibility more easily. Because if you share the scope and you share the guiding principles, and then down here we'll have deliverables, right? So you're going to have the what is 3, 4, 5, however many deliverables, and you can talk about some assumptions as well. Now you can delegate the whole responsibility for a task without the person having the experience to necessarily have learned what's needed along the way. And then the back, I don't spend a lot of time here, but it's a way just to take it through. This is the part that I facilitate in a group, and then this individual people can use it to fill out like the on-ramp phase. What do they need to do getting ready? And these things help us because if you've ever sat down to create something, let's say you're building a new landing page, and you sit down at the computer to start building the landing page, you pretty quickly realize, wow, it would have been great to sketch this out first. And so then you go sketch it out and you go back to the computer, and now you're building it, and now you have to put in images. And you know what? It would have been a good idea to come up with the images first. So one of the things I might put in here is develop the library, right? SOPs, pictures, videos, just have some library so you're not starting from scratch. That's just an example of the on-ramp. And then you need to what is an enabling subproject? If you've ever seen some of the road construction where they're redoing a road and they'll build like a small little sub road that goes off to the side. It's not high quality, might be a little bit, slower speed, but it's a way for people to keep driving, to drive around the construction so they're not impeding traffic. That would be an enabling subproject to build this extra road. Scaffolding is another example. You can paint the building, wash the windows, but if you put scaffolding up, it's going to go a lot faster. So that would be another example. And then the short-term fix if needed. I like the short-term fix because oftentimes, and let's use an initiative, right? Because I say you first innovate, then you have to sell it, then you have to scale it. And so innovation is the creation, what we're talking about now. Selling is communicating, getting the word out, and then scaling requires leadership. And in the middle phase of selling and getting the word out, you're going to be doing some marketing, and then you have to do ads. And each one of these can take major work in getting the right people in the room, but you can put a short-term fix in. You can do a PASTOR kind of ad copy and put it together quickly. I like using ClickFunnels because you can go from idea to online and out there in 4 hours, literally, especially after you've built up your library. It could even be less than that. And that does not have to be your main website. You can still use the company website for the major facing. This is sort of a duplicate site, and you can test short-term fixes. You can come in and do A/B testing constantly. A/B/C testing is easy enough. You can test all sorts of things as you go forward, but it's a good source for a short-term fix. So you can get the advertising started while you're waiting for the agency to get aligned and getting all those things figured out. Meanwhile, you have the word going out. You're testing some videos. You're testing some ad copy, etc. Testing some audiences, and then the follow-up and open items. Again, we won't talk about this too much because I want to make it interactive in the Zoom room, and this is going to take up all that time. So I'm going to shift over to Zoom right now, and I'll leave this open for a few minutes. Okay, so I don't have problems with the audio, etc. I'm going to shut this. I'm going to close out the live stream, and then you should join me in the Zoom room again I'll give you that meeting link. Let me read it off the invite so that I don't miss anything. So let's go to 835-6485-9362. That's the code for the Zoom room. I'll see you over there.